Hey there, welcome to a new show hosted by me, Charlie Teal. Today we're going to be sitting down with Todd Looby, the executive director of the BendFilm Festival. He is a man who I think is incredibly creative and has done fantastic things for not just the fest, but also Bend in general. Todd is himself a filmmaker. His feature, Be Good, was called Well Acted, Crafted, and Observed by Variety. And his second feature, Lefty, was named one of the top 10 movies of 2009 by Chicago Tribune Metro Mix. His narrative short won a special jury award at Slam Dance in 2011 and Best Short at the Boston Film Festival. Throw into that mix, he has been married for 12 years and has 2 kids. So, Todd Looby, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
I'm honored to be your inaugural guest.
Yeah. Well, you and I have known each other now for a couple of years, and serving on the board of the Bend Film Fest, I've gotten to know you and gotten to work with you a good bit, and it's been really fun becoming friends, and I couldn't think of anybody else I'd want to start this off with.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Likewise, Charlie.
Yeah. So, reading your bio from when you were in Chicago, it says that you taught yourself filmmaking, and that you became a full-time filmmaker after working for a construction company for several years. What I want to know is, backing up further than that, why filmmaking? What was it always a passion? Was this something you came to after college, or did you always know you wanted to be a filmmaker? Like, what launched you in a creative direction and not just like a straight business direction? Yeah,
I was, I would say, going back to high school, interested in being an engineer, and I was always looking at, I entered college as a civil engineering student, but became quickly disillusioned with that in my freshman year. And over the spring course of that year, I took there's this course, English 103. There were no real film curriculum, at least at University of Illinois back in those days, and I would say very few schools had some kind of film curriculum, in the early to mid 90s. So it was English 103 was the thing, but it was an intro to film. And it just kind of blew me away. I had sort of gotten a little interested in film, let's say senior year of high school and that, but living in Chicago, I lived on the far south side, and you really couldn't see any sort of independent films down there. You'd have to travel up to the north side, downtown, where that stuff was playing. And I kind of started doing that a little bit when I was a senior, maybe saw a couple, and that helped kind of shape me. But I do remember, vivid recollections of, my first introduction to like seeing a film that was, either, a comedy or a horror movie or just a blockbuster, say as a kid, or one that was done by an auteur, I grew up with 2 older sisters. So one of their favorite movies was The Outsiders, because you had the Brat Pack, you had, Swayze, Rob Lowe, and all those guys. Right. But for me as a kid, kind of growing up in a city and in a neighborhood that, sort of had these quasi gangs. They weren't gangs, but so I identified with them too and loved the movie. But I always remember like looking at, watching that movie and seeing something different that I hadn't seen in other movies. Like I particularly remember there's this one just great scene of Diane Lane and C. Thomas Howell, Pony Boy, and it's shot in the Magic Hour, which I've known subsequently obviously the Magic Hour, but it's like right before the Big Rumble or something, and I have vivid recollections of seeing that scene and then being like struck by kind of an intent behind, something more deep than what you're just seeing the characters doing and stuff. You're sort of paying attention for the first time to cinematography. So let's say that's when I'm like 7 or 8 or 9, So, little introductions with actual cool cinema had been few and far between until college, and then I took this English 103, and it, it kind of takes you through. We saw about 3 or 4 Hitchcock movies, and it was sort of a joke in that, like, oh, you got to do English 103, watch movies.
Right.
And they really did have a cool space where it was tiered seating, and they had laser discs. This was 93.
Yeah. Those big laser
really
discs where you
excited.
slide it into a giant player.
They were really excited to show like Apocalypse Now on this laser disc, which I believe they did have to pause halfway through and flip it.
It's like a record.
Sure. But that was a big deal, and so yeah, it started Hitchcock, and then you see all these movies, these classic movies, Daughters of the Dust, and the Maya Deren one, Meshes of the Afternoon, these classic things of cinema, and then I think, Apocalypse was probably the last movie we saw. So, so that kind of, and then you're just blown away. And then I remember, kind of sitting in the front row of that thing on purpose, knowing I was going to see something, and then sure enough, then just being totally taken with the next 3 hours were just like, whoa.
Right. So is that what knocked you off of the civil engineering track, and you're like, I am all in on film, like this is my passion?
In theory, but again, there's no curriculum, so during that time it was pretty confusing, because I know like engineering's just, as sort of I don't know, an occupation or a vocation in life. I'm like, it's not totally grabbing me. And trying to figure out what to do then. So the only option then is to be an English major, and you would have like a film minor.
Right.
But they didn't even have really a film minor there. So what I did was, and I had so much advice to like, just knuckle down and do the engineering for 4 years.
Right.
And just, get that so you have something to fall back on. And, then you could pursue whatever this artistic thing afterward, because it's true. It wouldn't have necessarily done me much good to have pursued this sort of film track at that time.
Right.
And it's much different now than it was then, in that now a kid can go through a film class or some kind of curriculum, and they can actually there's way more jobs in media production than there ever were, and there's way more need. I mean, the amount of content being produced is, infinitely more than it was in 1997.
Right,
so there were no jobs when I graduated, but now there's thousands. So
I mean, now you've got like Netflix making something like insane, like 800 productions that they've committed to for the next couple of years or per year.
Because there's more people doing it, it's not necessarily easier to get your stuff on screen. It is, but I guess what I'm saying is now you have every company, wants video content. You need, weddings are way more lucrative than they were back then. So let's say you just want to make a living doing it, freelancing or whatever. There's way more options to do it now than there were. Everyone wants video content, and they want people that are good at it, whatever. So you can make money doing it much more you could than, in the late 90s or whatever. So what I wound up doing was I did get out of engineering, but I was still always and really interested in, environmental issues, let's say, and water quality. So I should back up and say that this civil engineering program, the environmental engineering was underneath the civil thing. There wasn't a separate sort of civil thing. So I was always really, I didn't want to give that up necessarily. Commitment and interest in protecting and correcting, bad things in the environment. So I basically did a double major of English and biology that had an environmental.
Okay.
And then that takes me through undergrad, and then I went on to grad school and I actually took environmental science, and civil engineering was what I got a master's in.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it was it was the last semester of my master's year that a friend came to me and said, hey, they're looking for people to be, they're doing a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest play. Do you want to audition with me? I'm going to give it a shot.
Right.
I'm like, okay. I'm like, I was always interested in acting, but I never was in a play or anything, can't sing, they had talent contests and talent shows at school and whatnot.
Right, yeah.
Never in the high school plays and stuff. I was always doing sports. So that opportunity came, and I auditioned and got a part of, was it Cheswick? Cheswick is, he's kind of this little toady to McMurphy.
Okay,
and just kind of loves McMurphy and follows him around. And anyway, it was a really fun experience, and I got a lot of encouragement from that, like people saying, you're actually pretty good. And I just never thought about before, but I had such a good time doing it that I wanted to. I definitely left grad school, with a really good degree and a really hot job market, but I found myself kind of turning down jobs to see what I could do with this acting thing, and then got into improv in Chicago. But at the same time, it was really interesting. I was with a friend, and he was, even though he's from Chicago, he was doing a year volunteer service in Portland, and he was working with this group, and he said, so we get equipment for what I'm doing for these guys that I'm helping, with veterans and other people in like addicts and recovery and things. And it was like Overstock.com or something. It was back in '99. And he's like, I know you're interested in film, and check this out, I got a digital camera. So it was a one of really early versions of a mini DV camera.
Okay.
So this is '99, the thing was made in '98. And it really could fit in my pocket. I mean, it was really cool in that, what are those cameras that are already obsolete?
The flip cam?
Yeah, was that what it was? Flip, right, yeah. I mean, they were the size of that.
It was like a tall,
right, flip
like
cam.
packet of cigarettes sort of size. And
yeah. So it was that size, but it could fit a mini DV tape in.
Right. Oh my God.
And
right.
So it was really interesting. So, because before then, all video cameras were, what's it called? Not DVC cam, but
big
Beta
beastly things.
Yeah, I mean, either you had the big ones where you throw an actual VHS tape in,
right,
or you had those ones that had a kind of a bigger tape, but those were still pretty bulky.
Yeah,
this one could literally fit in my pocket. So I spent a lot of the good portions of my early 20s bringing that wherever we went, and I would just film whatever stupid things, my friends and I were doing.
Right.
And I do remember when he handed me that camera, that I also had the manual, and I remember I didn't sleep that night just going through the manual and kind of seeing like all the crap you could do with it. Whether you had editing, I didn't even, at that point, didn't know editing software or anything. I was just, it had all these in-camera effects.
Right.
Like I could fade out if I wanted to. I could do this. I could, if I planned ahead enough, I could have a fully cut video that has cool effects or transitions right in the camera. So yeah, I just, and then that's kind of, I would just do that little by little by little by little, just shoot hundreds of hours of stuff. And then I kind of taught myself how to edit just using 2 VHSs. Yes. And it was some garage sale or something where I found this little sound mixer, and I kind of figured out, how to, it was really, so I would have the DV tape, so I'd run it through my camera, and then I would just hit, record on the VCR, pause, so I get the thing playing on the thing, so I basically cut it on the VCR, and so then I have one tape with the cut I wanted, but then I know I wanted to add VO and I wanted to add music.
Right.
So then I would have the 2 VCRs run, do the same thing, record, and you need 2 fingers because it's play, record, and pause, and do that, and then I'd run through my mixer, and I had a little microphone, and I'd do my VO. So then I did a music track.
Right.
And then I'd, have the music tracked one, and then run it through again, and then do the VO.
And so, all of this is happening while you're also working in a professional environment as well.
Yeah, so I did wind up, I took that summer off after I got my master's, and I was just out, it was a function of kind of where I lived in kind of a highly politically connected neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And I was out with this guy whose dad owned this big construction company, and he said, hey, you have this degree in engineering. And I said, well, it's not in construction. He goes, doesn't matter. They just need people. They need people. They need people. Here, I'll have my dad call you. So the next day, his dad calls me, and he's like, hey, you want a job? And I was like, I don't know,
Right.
And he's like, what? What do you mean you don't know? It's like, this is Walsh Construction. Do you understand? We're the biggest company in Chicago.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
You're like, I did not know
so
that.
Anyway, a really good guy and a great family. So it's like if you want a big job or you want to work for a big corporation that's a $4 billion corporation, like this is the one where it's not public, it's family owned.
Right.
They're good, Irish guys that the type of the people that I've always known. So, they still fit into that thing. So it's like, oh, okay, I guess I need a job. I can't, be mooching off my parents, and I really don't know what else to do. I mean, I could still have this job, and I can do improv at night, which I was doing. So I would literally go to this job every day, and then I would, I think I had improv once or twice a week or whatever. And I lived on the far south side still, and I would go to this job, and then go to the north side early, and then sit in a coffee shop and like write or think about this movie I was working on or whatever, and then go to improv. And do that, and then the next night, then I would tinker around on the this other
so
movie stuff.
So where in all that time frame did you meet Monica, or is that?
Monica was so this was in about '99, and then Monica wound up. So the friend I was saying that that gave me the camera, he was working with Monica in this volunteer program in Portland.
Okay.
So they were friends, and Monica in '02 or whatever was looking to go to grad school, and she was University of Chicago had a great program in social service administration. So she came, visited while I was living with this friend. She came, visited, and to check out U of C, and I have a vivid recollection of one of the nights she stayed with us. It was the State of the Union in like '02 with Bush, and I just remember, like my buddies, were totally apolitical, but so we were the only two like in the living room. Like, do you believe this? This is insane.
Like Monica's freaking out, you're freaking out, and you're like,
war? What?
We have connection here, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So we were like, this guy is a moron. And he's talking about this war? What?
So basically it's Bush that brought you two together.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. See, he's not all bad. Yeah,
right. There is an upside there.
There's an upside, yeah. The resistance kind of, like that's when a lot of people have come together in a resistance is good.
So then you jump ahead a few years and you leave the construction company to become a full-time filmmaker?
Yeah, so in about it's while I was in construction, there were some really good things about it. I mean, like, I really liked the people I worked with. I really liked sort of being on a construction site, and it was really kind of fascinating. What I want to say, like sociology, in a way, like that's. I mean, I did like math and figuring things out and learning new things. Of course, I mean, I have an engineering mind, but sociologically, I thought it was super fascinating. Okay. Interestingly enough, and this is how Monica and I probably bonded more, is that she was going to the school at the University of Chicago. She wound up doing, and the job I was working on was the University of Chicago. Was this we were building this athletic center.
Okay.
By this famous architect Cesar Pelli, who did the Petronas Towers in Malaysia. They're like two like honeycomb deals.
Yeah.
It used to be the tallest building in the world. And I was on that site for 2 years, however long she was in the doing grad school. So that was pretty interesting. So we'd have lunch sometimes, and
Yeah.
you know, I would hang out after, and we'd go to Jimmy's, this awesome bar on 55th Street, and
Complain about Bush.
exactly. Can't believe it. Yeah. So yeah, which is fascinating because University of Chicago, they say, is the birthplace of the neocon mindset.
Right.
It was Levi Strauss or something. A lot of crazy things happen at the University of Chicago, on both sides. But so I was working on that project. Wait, what was your question again?
Talking about when you decided to leave the construction
Oh,
company,
right.
go into filmmaking full time.
Yeah, so I was going to say, you know, so it was really, it was sociologically very interesting to be on a
Right.
construction site because you had people of all walks of life, all races, all ethnicities, all, you know, religions, all ages, all classes, which was really interesting. You know, you have developers and you have architects who are kind of like artists, and then you had kind of us as the construction managers sitting in the trailer. We're kind of like the directors of this whole operation, and you know, like going back to the developers are like the producers. They have the money, they have the overall thing. We're the directors, dealing with them, the pressures of the producers, but also then all of the construction workers were essentially the actors, like, you know,
Right.
and the architect's the screenwriter. And you know, so we're in charge of directing all these actors, and you know, Chicago's a big union town too. So then there's all sorts of other interesting things that come on when, you know, someone's threatening a strike or someone is striking. Then everyone strikes. You know, the solidarity with other unions, whether, you know, if it's the electrical guys or, you know, or steel guys. You
Right.
know, if there's some strike, everyone will, and then the job will stop, and you know, everyone goes crazy for a while.
So you were getting good experience in how to manage people at all different levels and all this stuff.
and all competing in, you know, everyone. I mean, everyone has the same ultimate goal to build a building, but everyone has a competing and potentially conflicting interest in doing it because. You know, just because it costs money and it's definitely, you know, the finite there. You know, it's like this is going to cost more than initially anticipated. So who's going to pay for it? I'm not going to pay for it. Okay, and then you fight about that or whatever. And but then, you know, the interesting thing is then, you know, because University of Chicago is in, I guess you could call it an integrated neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, but there's also neighborhoods that are relatively poor right around there, and you know, unemployment's high. So you know, people in surrounding neighborhoods were saying, well, no one from our neighborhood is working on this job that's a mile away from here. This is ridiculous. You got all these guys coming in from the suburbs or wherever else. So then you know, we have community activists and people striking outside the gate, and aldermen calling me. I mean, it was really interesting. One of the I'll never forget is when I was, you know, whatever, 25 or something, an alderman in a close neighborhood. Her name's Toni Preckwinkle, and she was one of the top 2 people for Chicago mayor this year. Oh. And I just remember getting this call one day, and the secretary transferred to me for some reason, but she's like, "What are you doing?" You know, I pick up the phone, and she's like literally just yelling at me. I go, "Whoa!" I'm like,
Right.
I don't make any decisions.
You're like,
here.
I'm not the one you want to talk.
I hear you. I mean, that does sound terribly unfair. I wish I could do something about it. Anyway, it was pretty funny. And then, you know, obviously she rose up the political ranks.
Right. So jumping ahead then, like once you become so you were a full-time filmmaker for a period of a couple of years, right?
Well, I was, you know, while I was on that construction job, that, you know, all these things were happening, and then one day it just clicked. I was at my friend's bachelor party, and I got up early in the morning, and everything just kind of clicked in my head, like, that's a great movie. Like, everything that I was experiencing on this construction site, I was like, whoa, you know. And then I had this idea for a movie, and then, you know, really quickly wrote kind of a rough script, and then was just hell-bent on making this into a feature film. Because at that point, that was right after the Richard Linklater did this movie called Tape in 2001.
Okay.
And it was Ethan Hawke and the other guy from Dead Poets Society and Uma Thurman. It was just them three in a hotel room. And Linklater said he shot it over 6 days with two digital cameras, kind of like the one I had. So I'm like, that's it, you know,
You're like, I can do
I'm
this.
going to set this in a construction trailer and just do the same thing and have all these crazy things happening to this person, and you know, then kind of internalizing, which may or may not have been a mistake, but like the lead character is someone who's conflicted and like, yes, I want to do this job, I'm into this job, but I also would love to be an actor. You know, so then it's like just a day in the life of this guy, in that conflict of wanting to be an actor, but wanting to do the right thing at the job and whatever. So yeah, so then I sort of quit the job to try to make that movie, but they didn't make it easy to quit because they're like, yeah, you can make the movie and, you know, work part-time. And so, okay. So I did that. I made that movie, tried to make that movie while I was working part-time. And then that construction company eventually hired me to shoot just this documentary about making an air traffic controller at O'Hare Airport. And then they were paying me pretty handsomely.
Nice.
Almost as much as it was a construction, so I could quit that job, and then that's when I started doing film full time.
Gotcha. Okay. And then how far, like, jump ahead to you get contacted, or how did you hear about BendFilm? Where did that come in?
Yeah, so you know, I'd been making films, doing what I was talking about earlier, like, you know, I was shooting weddings and doing these things to just kind of pay the bills, and then making artistic films on the side, and luckily having, you know, money saved up from my construction thing. So I had a few movies that did okay on the fest circuit, and I was always really interested in moving out west, you know.
Right.
You know, I liked
at this
Chicago a
point,
lot,
you have kids. I mean, it's you and Monica.
Yeah.
Are you married, I'm assuming, at this point?
Yeah. So I was working, full-time as a filmmaker in 2010 when our first daughter was born, Tessa. Still doing that, and when the economy was bad, so it was a little hairy for a while, and worrisome and whatnot, nerve-wracking, and then our second child, when Monica was pregnant with our second child, Seamus, then we knew, like, we do want to move west. No one's remotely seems interested in hiring me in Portland, and at that point I was like, I don't care what I do for work, I just want to be out west, and I want to be in a different environment, and I want to be close to nature, and I want to be in a place that sort of appreciates artists and is just a little bit more loose than Chicago, and been trying for a couple years to move out to Portland, but when our second child was coming, we said, well, we're going to do it now or never, because second one comes in and it's just going to be harder every day to move. So then we just really kind of set a deadline, essentially, that in the spring of 14 we're going out west regardless. And very coincidentally and luckily, this job for BendFilm was listed in January of 14 or February of 14. And I didn't even see it, but Monica saw it because she was on a jobs list. And luckily, BendFilm had posted it, say, on Portland's Craigslist or something. So, so I answered it, and at that point, I had written 100 cover letters and resumes, and I sort of got it down to a science of how to stand out in a job market that was weak, because every job you're going for has tons of applicants, So this one had probably, I think they said 200 applicants or something and they were looking for 2 positions at that time. So, yeah, so luckily, I got my foot in the door with the first interview, and I thought it did well on Skype, and then the second they said, why don't you come out and meet us? And that's when the first time I was in Bend, and I loved it right away, and I loved just the idea of the job right away. So, luckily, they offered me the job, and it was still a difficult decision after that, because it wasn't, a ton of money, and we're uprooting everyone and moving across the country,
Right.
and but we just basically said we got to go for it. Let's do it.
And how did that gel with, at this point, obviously it seems like you were pursuing a creative path.
Yeah.
You're trying to make it as a filmmaker and
Right.
doing what you need to do to support your family in that process. I would imagine that as the BendFilm job showed up, that you were like, okay, it's still creative, it's still film, it's still all that, but it's like the management side, or the it's a different aspect of that of that field. Was that, I don't know, how did that feel to you? Did it feel like, okay, this is a cool, like, sort of lateral move within film, or
Yeah, I
how
would much
of
say-
that passion to make film was pushing you away or pushing
Right.
you in, or?
Yeah, so, while Tessa was 6 months, it was when I made my last narrative feature, so she's 6 months old. I was at home with her, and, money was tight, and, long-term security seemed, not very secure. So
Non-existent.
Exactly. So, I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm going to make this one last narrative feature, and if it does well, I can keep going. If it doesn't necessarily do well, then, I'll say I gave it my best and do
Right.
something else. And it was sort of a little of both. I mean, it was a really difficult production because Tessa, who was 6 months, played this baby
Yes.
in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was all about how difficult it was to be parents to, a kid
Yeah.
who didn't like to sleep, and was,
I can say I know that
a little colicky.
firsthand, yeah.
A little colicky. So it was, and then there's just pressures of financial and everything else, while it was difficult to raise a baby. And at the same time, I was, I got the opportunity to adapt this book. So I was trying to work on a script for that, and it was all impossible. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good movie. So I just wrote a script for that thing, and then shot it, and then was working on that while home and everything. So it just, and the film came out good. I'm pretty proud of it. I mean, I think there's a better cut still out there that
Right.
sometime I will go back to. But the lead actress in the movie is Amy Seimetz, and Amy was just she was the lead in the latest Pet Sematary.
Okay.
And she was in Aliens Covenant.
Okay.
And she directs, and I think she's in it too, of the Girlfriend Experience on Stars, which is one of the bigger shows. And she's doing something else crazy now too. I forget, but she's well known not only in just indie circles, but now in
Now in
the
the
establishment,
bigger
which is
world,
really
yes.
great. So anyway, I thought that film would have done more and pushed me along the path, and getting into bigger festivals, which is pretty important to build a filmmaking career. And that didn't necessarily happen. So I'm like, okay, fine,
Right,
I said I was
right.
going to do it. I'm going to do, then I'll just see what else, I'll get a real job. I don't care. And see what happens. But interestingly enough, through the making of that movie, and I had a couple other shorts that were doing really well on the fest circuit, just that experience being on the festival circuit and working with film festivals to help them programming absolutely was stuff on my resume and my cover letter that got this job.
Right. Right.
So I just thought it, was sort of the perfect kind of culmination of what I'd been working on since then. Because I
Right.
have, like I said, this mathematical and engineering mind at its very root that has, I'm left-handed, so I guess, I'm sort of equally mixed in right and left brain or
Right,
something.
right.
So, and then I have all this business management experience from the construction days. And I have this film experience, when I was a filmmaker. And then I should say, right before Seamus, our second, was born, I was the executive director of a nonprofit. So
That's
I had the
right,
nonprofit experience as well. So I had,
Right.
business management and nonprofit management experience and this film experience. So to me, it was just like, well, that, it makes sense to run a film festival.
Do you find running the film festival, like, does that also satisfy the creative urge as well?
Yeah, I would say very much so. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll get ideas now and again when, I let my mind not think about work.
Right.
So good, interesting ideas come to me that I was like, oh, that'd be an interesting short if I ever wanted to make it. But, it's just like your mind will go, I think, where your interests go. And, I would say it doesn't feel like a missing out on anything,
Right,
like
right.
making a movie is incredibly hard. Making a narrative feature, and the Be Good, the last one I shot was, we shot it for maybe $10,000. It's a feature film with decent actors and such. That's really hard to do, and it takes its toll, especially when you're in your late 30s, and so I don't necessarily miss it at all, and I still kind of exercise that muscle. When I just shoot videos of my kids. Like I'm like totally fine. Making a bike movie every year about my
Right.
son and his biking. Like. In fact, on Sunday is going to be my return to the festival world, and this short I made and showed here in town is going to be playing at Portland's Film by Bike Film Fest. Yeah. So that's the first fest I was actually in probably 5 years, which is interesting.
Right.
But it's just fun, and I just exercise that muscle, and I like being around people that are interested in film, and it's great to go to Film Fest and still talk to shop and see people that say, I was on the fest circuit with back when I was doing it, seeing them doing great things
Right.
and seeing them on Netflix, and it's really cool to see. And then, catching up that, you can sort of interact with them like peers, and I get a lot of satisfaction, and it's very creative. Every day is extremely creative in how we run the business, and just how we, manage events and things like that. It's like it's a job that really allows you to exercise a lot of creative energy. If I'm not making films, but I still edit some stuff that we'll put out some videos, and
Right.
I'll be editing, and
Right.
I'll do a lot of that stuff too. But it's just putting things together. It's fun.
Well, and also I want to talk about, it seems that you've had a big impact on the growth of the fest since you came on in 2014. One of the things I remember you doing right off the rip was trying to get more filmmakers and actors and producers,
Yeah.
directors, like people from productions, get them out here
Right.
for the fest.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a genius move, because it's part of what makes the fest fun is interacting with, getting to know, or at least getting to meet these people that made these things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the most interesting thing about BendFilm is, when I was a filmmaker, I would submit to BendFilm because I wanted to move to Oregon.
Right.
Never been to Bend, but I heard about it. I heard it's cool. But the fest itself, was kind of a best kept secret among filmmakers, I think, back in, it had a really hot start. And then I think, in 2007, after Eric Jambor left, who has a lot of cachet in the festival world, in the recession hit here, I think, the fest took a little dip as far as its national profile. And I was surprised, and when I came here to look, for the interview, I was just blown away. I was still a filmmaker at that point, so I'm in a situation where I'm like, I'm coming to a town that I've never been to, and whoa, this is cool.
Right.
So that's, I'm like, any filmmaker who steps off a plane in Redmond and looks west is going to be, whoa, never expected this.
Right.
And then it's going to walk downtown and go, this is awesome. Because I've had those experiences as a filmmaker in other fests,
Right.
going to the Florida Film Fest where they take you in this magical theater the Enzian, which is amazing, and you just never expect these things, and you know, you're blown away. Or Wilmington, North Carolina, where I went to Cuccoloris, it's like, Wilmington, you know, heard about it forever, but what a cool town, you know.
Right.
And just how, you know, the town embraces you, and how, you know, so when I came to the job, I realized that the travel budget for filmmakers was really low. And so one of the first moves I made was like, well, we got to change that, because I'm no good filmmaker. And I'm not even saying I was a good filmmaker, but I wouldn't go to at that point in my career, I wouldn't go to a film fest unless they paid for my hotel and flight.
Well, I mean,
you know,
just economically,
right.
like you're
And that's what I'm
struggling
saying.
enough.
Yeah.
It's not like you're rolling in money when you're an independent filmmaker.
Yeah.
To then go to a fest that you have to pay for the flight for and the hotel for and everything.
Exactly.
Like, how does that? You're like, I can't justify that.
I mean, the big
especially
ones
if you have small kids or.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, if you're paying $600 a pop to go and you have small kids and stuff, it's just I can't go. I'm so happy that the film's going to play there. I hope it does well, but yeah, sorry. And you know, like I would fly myself out to Slam Dance. And if I got in a bigger fest, obviously I'd pay for those because you could kind of see it. But, you know, for a fest like Ben, it's like, I totally want to go. I would love to go, and maybe I can build a vacation in here. But if I can't, and I've got to take off to work or something. So I want, you know, so I was able to kind of save money elsewhere and convince the board to, you know, put this pot of money in so that we could fly filmmakers out, so that we could sort of get the right filmmakers here, so that it can then elevate the profile and then hopefully capitalize that and get more and more filmmakers out and stuff like that. So
when it seems like, just from what I've seen the last couple of years, when you have those filmmakers here, it's also opportunities for them to network and make better connections between each other.
Right.
And I have to imagine that has an impact as well, of like you can, as a filmmaker, you not only are meeting other filmmakers that you've sort of tangentially known and stuff, but you're also creating connections that maybe help you in your next production or
I mean, that's the main thing. It's always good to show your work and have it be absorbed and let's say analyzed and appreciated by an audience that you hear directly from. You know, that's not why anyone makes movies necessarily, but it's awesome to hear. It's very validating.
Yeah.
And if I didn't do that, if I didn't receive that feedback, you know, you would keep going. It just helps you keep going. But at the same time, you know, film fests are tremendous networking opportunities, and they really do build a lot of collaborations. You do, over 2 days at a film fest, you bond really strongly with people you just met, and you know, you see their work and you appreciate, oh, I like, you know, like, who shot that? Who you shot? Oh, wow, can we work together? And you know, like, so much of that stuff happens for filmmakers at film fest. So it's really unfortunate when you can't go to a film fest when your film's showing, because you do miss opportunities. And then, you know, the people you meet do become collaborators in the future, also, and your work gets better, you know. And
also, looking at the economic growth of the BendFilm Festival since you came on, I mean, what did you say it was like the overall economic impact of the film fest was?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what, let's say it was, but let's say now we could say, you know, that over the 4 days, like, you know, people that attend the festival might spend upward of, you know, $1.5 million in Central Oregon, like, over those 4 days.
Economic impact.
As an economic
4
impact.
days.
You know, and that's like without multipliers and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, you get 1,400 tourists coming in, and even the people that come from Ben, which is at least 75% of our audience.
Yeah.
They're spending a ton of money because they're staying out all day and staying downtown, and they're sort of, you know, experiencing the town as a tourist. I know people that live in town that get places at the Oxford, or get places at McMenamins or Doubletree, and they just do the fest for 4 days. And they're eating in restaurants, shopping, doing whatever, and, you know, sort of living like a tourist. It's pretty interesting.
And so, what do you think, like, for yourself, for your family, for Monica, for the fest, like what is it that you see as the next, the next step for you, or the next, is it now just a progression, like building on what we've already done with the fest, and just trying to step it up even further, get our profile even bigger, like staying on here? Do you want to make another feature? What do you see as the next thing for you and for your family and for your creativity professionally, like all of those things?
Yeah, I mean, for the festival, going back to your previous question, was the festival had been sort of a best kept secret beforehand. Everyone that came here was just blown away. They loved it. I think the staff here was doing a great job. They got the thing in a sound financial footing after a deep recession here in Bend. So things were, I inherited it in a pretty good spot. Yet I knew that it had just so much more to grow. I knew that, even just nationally with filmmakers, let alone, how more locally, the fest could become a part of the town, or whatever our programs could be part of the town's culture. But, I knew that all these filmmakers that I were working on would kill to show their movies here. And so, I knew it had a long way to go, or there's really no ceiling.
Much higher.
There's no ceiling to what really can happen here.
Okay.
The only thing is we want to retain the character of the fest, which is celebrating a really cool town, having filmmakers be accessible to audience, because I think for both people, filmmakers and audience, like the interactions are what moves both parties. Like, let's say a filmmaker comes here and loves the town and loves the other filmmakers that come here, but it doesn't really interact with anyone. They don't get that feeling that I was talking about. That appreciation. Filmmakers will remember that always. That they met so many cool people, so many people passionate about film, so many people that encouraged them to keep going. Because as a filmmaker, you're always thinking, in this level, as an independent filmmaker like I was, you're always thinking about, when do I give it up? And people could be doing well. You can get a Netflix show and it's still like, I don't know if this is going to work financially. I got kids now and all that. So that sort of feedback keeps people going, and I hear it every year. The filmmakers just love, the people in this town. So, and then likewise, people in the town, love the filmmakers that are coming in and really appreciate the greater quality of programming that we've been able to develop, especially since Eric Jambor's come back on board as the programmer. People are really appreciating that and loving the filmmakers. So, I think more people will in town will want to experience that as well. And so the audience, I think, has right now, if we don't add any venues, we could still double the amount of exactly. Exactly. So our screenings are never empty, but on average, we could bring in, twice the amount of people. So there's tons of audience room to go, and there's even adding venues, so that can even get bigger, and and obviously the more filmmakers can come. So there's still a long way to go, but I would say,
there's a lot of room for growth and
and the festival alone, and a lot of room for growth still,
which is exciting, right? I mean, that's
totally. But now, I mean, so now we run our own cinema. So every day we're pretty soon going to be showing 3 movies every day, and that is incredibly exciting. I mean, that is like, Eric and I are just. And Abby and Tracy and our staff and everyone that's currently working at Tin Pan is just so excited to just have this thing where we play with, and we just, every day we all come up with about, 5 new ideas to do, like,
That's
all
awesome.
of the stuff.
That's
and everyone, that we've heard from about us taking over the Tin Pan has been like, oh, finally, this is the perfect, everyone's just like, this is perfect, the perfect marriage of space and you guys. And, so I know that, the audience is going to be really hungry. People in Ben are just going to be really hungry for the stuff that we're going to do. Because we're going to do a lot of cool stuff. I mean, there's a lot of good films being shown here and, in the Tower and McMinimans and at the Regal as well. But, there's so much opportunity to have a lot more fun and to have more education programs and classic cinema and, a lot of that stuff Ben people don't yet have the the ability to experience right now.
Or like the venue for that,
the venue
right?
for
like,
that, exactly.
That's
right.
now what the Tin Pan is going to be.
That programming, that cultural programming is not currently offered here locally. And so, with 100 years of cinema, I mean, there's no end in things that you can do that'll be interesting and that people will be interested in, which is great.
That's
we'll
cool.
always
So
get audiences.
as we kind of come to the end of our time, which I cannot believe we've already burned through
I told you
the time we had. we'll have to do a part 2, I think, on this. But is there any particular thing? Certainly, the Tin Pan Theater purchase has been a huge, exciting addition. Anything else like that, or just something that you've always wanted to be able to share? That final thoughts.
Well, the only thing I could think about, something we were talking about earlier before the interview, and I think where you're going thematically on, about the show is potentially, where creativity takes you. I think, people watching or whatever have the same question. They have jobs and some security or need some security, but have a creative interest. And I know I certainly needed a lot of motivation to quit a very secure job to do film or whatever. And so, I think the only thing that I could say that might be instructive to someone who's in the same position is, it's really interesting to see where you end up, when you're talking about pursuing dreams or interests or whatever, you would just never expect it. Like when I quit my construction job, never would I have thought in 10 years that I'll be running a film festival.
Right,
like that
right.
But I would probably say, and I think I could be, I'm being 100% honest, is that I would rather be doing this here than if I was like a filmmaker. That if I was making a decent, a living as a filmmaker, I can't envision being happier in that position. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you do have this creative interest, that you should find some way to pursue it. Like, never put it on the shelf. Never not do it because you can't do it all the time. Because my thing is very gradual. Like I said, I was shooting a feature while working, 30 hours a week as a construction manager, and even then it was incredibly hard to quit. And I'm glad I never did quit outright to do something, to jump over a cliff that I really didn't know anything about. It took me a long time to learn about filmmaking once I did it, and so it was good to have a job there, and it sort of kept me motivated and stuff. But I would say, the big kind of overarching philosophical thing would, whatever doesn't feel right that you're doing, to stop doing. It's like, that's, there was, I was raised Catholic, and, there's some great scholars like Thomas Merton and stuff, but, their definition of sin is basically something that, there's no these hard, fast rules, but it's whatever you're doing that you just know is wrong, that you're not paying attention to, or you're bearing, like it's you doing something that's not who you are.
Right.
And there's this other guy, James Martin, who you'll hear on OPB every so often. This great Jesuit priest who's pretty cool. And, he wrote this book kind of taking this Thomas Merton philosophy, and the book's called Becoming Who You Are. And it's sort of all about self-discovery. And I would say, like, the best things about creative pursuits, that any creative pursuit is essentially a pursuit in figuring out who you are and what makes you tick. And that's why I love when I talk to kids in classrooms here about filmmaking and try to get them interested in making movies and future filmmakers and stuff. And I say, and I learned this from Caldera. Caldera is fantastic at, having kids be, using art to become more self-aware, especially underserved kids who do not receive, exterior
validation.
Validation, thank you, yeah. And then, well, if I'm doing this myself and this is pretty good, it's so confidence building and character building, and through that, you do sort of, this is what I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. Everything else that society, whatever else is telling me I should be interested in, that's not, wow, this is interesting. This is interesting what I'm interested in,
pursue it because you are interested
because you are interested. And I know that, this is nothing on my parents, but it's just kind of how the neighborhood we grew up in, very Irish Catholic, there's a few things you do. You become a cop, a fireman, or some of the people that are more money.
Filmmaker was not high on that list.
No, there was one dude in the neighborhood who was a knucklehead. It was a great guy, but it was a goofball. It was the only person I'd ever heard of before that wanted, was making movies. This guy, we called Dennis the Menace, who lived down the block, and he was a goof, but, but he's the only one that, oh, you want to be a filmmaker? That's weird. So that kind of always, but there was no one else in the neighborhood that would have done that. So and there were no artists I knew. It was, even musicians, not until later in high school or college would people actually really pursue. We had 4 dudes that I went to grammar school with that started this band, and they was the only guys I know that really played musical instruments. So
that was the only creative people in your whole neighborhood.
It wasn't. It just wasn't part of how we were raised or whatever. And
what was the book you mentioned? Becoming.
I believe it's called Becoming Who You Are.
Becoming Who You Are.
Yeah.
Is that a book you would recommend to people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't care. And the greatest thing about Thomas Merton is, yes, he was a Catholic monk. Gosh, it's been a while since I've read, but I'm a big Merton fan. In fact, I wanted to write a biopic about him because I think people unfortunately don't know about him. But his later scholarship is mostly in Sufism and Zen and Buddhism and stuff. Oh, wow. So he takes this really mystical view of Catholicism, or of Christianity, I guess, and really. I was reading his journals. He's like, I got more in common with Sufis than I do with this monk who's next door to me, and because he was going on this big, broader picture of the mystical realm. And I think, this book it's probably rooted in some, Catholic Christian things, but it's more about, it's about self-discovery through some sort of spiritual pursuit or some connection with the other, and it's mostly connection with other people, and sort of a greater
super conscious or conscience.
Yeah. Atheists could get a ton out of this book.
Right.
It's not super religious, but
it's not rooted in Christian theology. It's more.
I think that stuff is referenced because that's the point of view that say Merton and Martin are coming from. But it's really just informative about how do you catch yourself sort of lying to yourself, what are sort of the signs of things that say you're doing or pursuing that really you shouldn't be.
Right.
You yourself know. There's no outside force telling you. There's no, 10 Commandments, and there's no God damning you. That's the big thing is you can look at evangelical Christianity. It's always there's these rules and God's damning you, and it's no, you're damning yourself. it was really interesting to hear that, like how to identify, you know, we're so focused on rules and things like that, but you know, it's a way to kind of get in touch with yourself and knowing through yourself what your own barometers are for good and bad. We all know it, but we all,
Right.
you know, you don't, you push that, I'll get
And
better
that's
tomorrow.
where, like,
I won't do
you
that
think
again.
the pursuit of creativity, the pursuit of your artistic passions, like those are the things that help you get through the nonsense and get through the noise to get to the signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, and I guess you'd say, you know, because let's say I have a creative mind that, or I just have this kind of mind where creativity is the outlet for that. And I shouldn't say that, and that's definitely not for everyone, right? Because people are just more open about their feelings and things like that. That's not me, right? And I would say more often than not, that's how artists are, right? We don't really know how to clearly communicate our feelings to people.
Right,
It makes
right.
it very uncomfortable.
Most
just
people
our-
are bad at that.
Most people are, but there are
Yeah.
some people that are really good.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, I was reading some article. I used to like Howard Stern because I couldn't imagine talking that honestly about myself publicly, let alone to millions of people.
Right.
So anyway, you know, people that are creative, I think you have some sort of interpersonal, I'm not gonna say defect, but deficiency. That makes it sound negative, I'm sorry, but I can't think of another word for it.
Right.
So the way that we express ourselves is creativity. You know, we have a more, you know, abstract way of communicating. People are really good at communicating directly a lot, but you know, artists need to communicate abstractly, and frankly, that's really needed in all human experience because the brain is so complex that sometimes concepts or whatever else have to be presented to someone very abstractly, and then it makes sense, you know, because we have a lot of barriers come up. If someone tells you something directly, there's a lot of defensiveness that comes up, and you can't absorb what they're trying to say, even though, and then they'll draw you a picture and be like, oh, okay.
Well, Todd, thank you for sitting down and talking with me today. And
Thanks for having me.
I think talking about how creativity lets us explore who we are and what we're trying to figure out and make connections with people, that's a perfect place to wrap this up, I think. So
Good.
thanks, man.
All right, man.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.